The screaming stopped at 3:47 in the morning. Admiral Kate Rivers stood at the observation deck of humanity's flagship, the Defiance, watching the last embers of what had once been the Vorthan homeworld fade into cosmic dust. Her reflection stared back from the reinforced glass hollow eyes, gray-streaked hair pulled into a regulation bun, and a face that had aged decades in the past 5 years. Behind her, the bridge crew worked in silence, their fingers dancing across holographic displays with practiced efficiency. "Ma'am," came the voice of Lieutenant Ben Cross, her communications officer. "The last evacuation pod has been neutralized." Kate didn't turn around. She'd heard that euphemism 10,000 times across 17 different star systems, neutralized, as if they were discussing the chemical spill instead of the systematic extinction of an entire species. "Understood," she replied, her voice steady despite the weight crushing her chest. "Begin deployment of the cleansing protocol." The cleansing protocol, even the name made her sick. It was humanity's final solution to the problem that had plagued them for the better part of a century: how to ensure that no enemy species could ever threaten Earth again. The answer, as it turned out, was devastatingly simple. Make sure there were no enemy species left to threaten anyone. Behind her, she heard the familiar hum of the antimatter charges being armed. In 30 minutes, every planet, moon, and asteroid in the Vorthan system would be reduced to its component atoms. Not even bacteria would survive what came next. "Admiral," another voice called out. This time it was Commander Paul Gray, her tactical officer and oldest friend. "The xenobiology team is requesting permission to collect final samples before we..." "Denied." Kate's reflection in the window showed no emotion. Full sterilization, no exceptions. She heard Paul's sharp intake of breath. They all knew what that meant. In the early days of the war, humanity had tried to preserve specimens, to study their enemies, to learn from them. That had been a mistake. The Zephyrians had used their preserved genetic material to create sleeper agents. The Keldari had somehow transmitted information through their dead tissue samples. And the Thane had nearly wiped out an entire research station when their inactive neural tissue had suddenly awakened and began broadcasting psychic attacks. Never again. That was humanity's new motto. Never again would they underestimate their enemies. Never again would they show mercy that could be turned against them. Never again would they allow any potential threat to Earth to survive. The irony wasn't lost on Kate. When the first alien contact had been made 53 years ago, humanity had greeted their visitors with open arms. The Altarians had seemed peaceful, curious about human culture, eager to trade knowledge and resources. For 3 beautiful years, it had looked like humanity's future lay in a grand galactic community. Then came the first colony ships. The Altarians had targeted the agricultural world's first new Iowa, Haven, and Greenfield. 3 billion souls, gone in a matter of hours. The aliens had used humanity's own trust against them, mapping Earth's defenses, learning about human psychology, all while planning the systematic harvesting of the human race. Every great bond starts with a single moment of courage. HFY Chronicle Stories is just beginning, and your support matters. If you love emotional sci-fi tales, forbidden connections, and stories that stay with you, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us bring more stories from the stars to you. That betrayal had changed everything. Humanity learned that in a universe filled with predators, showing weakness was tantamount to signing their own death warrant. So they had adapted. They had become something new, something terrible, something necessary. They had become conquerors. "Antimatter charges armed and ready," reported the weapons officer. Kate finally turned away from the window. The bridge crew looked at her with a mixture of respect and barely concealed fear. She had become their monster, their necessary evil, the one who made the hard choices so they could sleep at night knowing Earth was safe. "Execute cleansing protocol," she commanded. The flash of annihilation lit up the bridge for exactly 4.3 seconds. When it faded, the Vorthen system was nothing more than a slowly expanding cloud of superheated plasma. Kate watched the sensors confirm what they all knew: zero life signs, zero artificial structures, zero potential for any Vorthen technology or biology to ever threaten humanity again. That it was the 17th system they had cleansed in the past 2 years. "Jump coordinates locked in for the Meridian Cluster," announced Navigator Lisa Park. "We have confirmation of hegemony presence on 6 worlds. The hegemony." Kate almost smiled at the name. Another collection of species that had decided humanity represented a threat to their expansion plans. They had made the mistake of attacking the mining colony on Titan's Reach, killing 40,000 civilians in what they called a resource liberation action. That had been 8 months ago. Since then, humanity's expeditionary fleet had systematically hunted down every hegemony world, every ship, every trace of their civilization. The aliens never seemed to understand that their mistake wasn't attacking humanity. It was letting any human survive to carry word back to Earth. "Ma'am," Paul approached her station, his voice carefully neutral. "We're receiving a transmission from the Vindication. Captain Moore reports successful cleansing of the hegemony manufacturing hub in the Kepler system. All enemy assets destroyed." Kate nodded. The Vindication was one of 12 dreadnoughts in her fleet, each one carrying enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. Together, they formed humanity's answer to the question that had haunted the species since first contact. How do you survive in a hostile universe? The answer, Kate had learned, was simple. You don't just survive. You make sure everything that threatens you ceases to exist. "Orders from Fleet Command?" she asked. Paul hesitated. They single quotes questioning the scope of the current operation. "Admiral Chun thinks we might be moving too aggressively." Admiral Chun. Kate remembered him from the early days when humanity still believed in diplomacy and restraint. He had been one of the voices calling for measured responses, for attempts at communication with the aliens before resorting to violence. That had been before the massacre at New Geneva, before the biological weapons deployed against Earth's moon bases, before humanity learned that the universe didn't care about their moral sensibilities. "Admiral Chun is welcome to take his concerns to the Colonial Council," Kate replied. "Until then, we proceed as planned." She moved to the tactical display, where a 3-dimensional map showed the current positions of humanity's forces across known space. Red dots marked cleansed systems, empty voids where entire civilizations had once thrived. Blue dots indicated active human colonies, growing stronger and more numerous with each passing year. Green dots showed systems under surveillance, potential threats that hadn't yet revealed their hostile intent. The pattern was clear to anyone willing to see it. Humanity was expanding in all directions, not through exploration or trade, but through systematic elimination of everything that might one day pose a threat. They weren't conquering for resources or glory, or even revenge anymore. They were conquering for something far more fundamental, the absolute certainty that nothing in the universe would ever again catch humanity unprepared. "Lieutenant Cross," Kate called out, "open a channel to all ship commanders." The young man's fingers flew over his console. "Channel open, Admiral." Kate straightened, feeling the weight of command settle on her shoulders like a familiar coat. Across the fleet, 12 captains would be listening to her words, waiting for orders that would determine the fate of entire worlds. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the communications array. "We have received word that some in command question our methods. Let me be clear about our mission here. We are not explorers. We are not diplomats. We are not conquerors, in the traditional sense. We are humanity's immune system, and our job is to identify and eliminate threats before they can reach Earth." She paused, looking out at the plasma cloud that had once been a solar system. Every species we have encountered has proven hostile to human life. Every attempt at peaceful contact has ended in betrayal and bloodshed. We have learned through bitter experience that the universe is not interested in coexistence with humanity. Therefore, we must ensure that humanity exists alone. The bridge crew worked quietly around her, their efficiency born from years of similar speeches, similar decisions, similar acts of necessary brutality. We jumped to Meridian in 6 hours. Prepare for full deployment of cleansing protocols across all inhabited worlds in the cluster. No survivors. No exceptions, no mercy. She closed the channel and returned to her position at the observation window. In 6 hours, they would begin the systematic destruction of another civilization. In 6 months, this sector of space would be empty except for human colonies. In 6 years, if her plan succeeded, humanity would be the only intelligent species remaining in this galaxy. It wasn't glory. It wasn't even satisfying. But it was necessary. The first rule of Xenocide, Kate had learned, was that you never let them know you're coming. The Defiance and her sister ships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Meridian cluster like ghosts materializing from the void. Long-range sensors immediately began cataloging targets: 17 inhabited worlds, 43 defensive installations, and a battle fleet of over 200 vessels arranged in what the hegemony clearly thought was an impregnable defensive formation. They were wrong. All ships report ready, Commander Gray announced from his position at the tactical console. Stealth fields are holding. Enemy sensors show no indication they've detected our arrival. Kate studied the tactical display with the eye of someone who had orchestrated the deaths of civilizations. The hegemony had learned from the fates of their allies. Their worlds were heavily fortified. Their populations had been moved to underground shelters, and their fleet was positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire against any approaching threat. It would have been impressive if Kate hadn't seen it all before. Begin Phase 1, she ordered. Across the fleet, humanity's newest weapons came online. The silence generators had been developed specifically for operations like this, devices that created localized fields of quantum interference, making it impossible for enemy forces to communicate with each other or coordinate their defenses. In the space of 30 seconds, every hegemony ship, station, and planetary defense grid became isolated islands in a sea of electronic darkness. Enemy fleet is showing signs of confusion, reported Lieutenant Cross. Multiple vessels attempting to break formation and re-establish communications. Phase 2. The next wave of humanity's assault wasn't ships or missiles, it was information. Quantum viruses, uploaded directly into enemy computer systems to their own communication networks before the silence generators activated, began systematically destroying every piece of technology they encountered. Navigation systems failed. Weapon targeting became erratic, and life support systems started shutting down across the entire hegemony force. Kate watched it all with the detached interest of a surgeon removing a tumor. The hegemony ships were powerful individually, but they had been designed for traditional combat against enemies who followed established rules of warfare. Humanity had abandoned those rules the day they learned what betrayal felt like. Enemy vessels are going dark, Paul reported. Estimate 40% combat effectiveness lost across their entire fleet. Phase 3. Begin the harvest. This was the part that Kate tried not to think about too carefully. The harvest wasn't about resources or territory, it was about information. Before they cleansed a system, humanity always made sure to extract every piece of useful knowledge their enemies possessed. Technology, military tactics, genetic information, cultural data, star charts showing the locations of other potential threats. All of it was cataloged and stored before being put to use in humanity's expanding war machine. Boarding pods launched. From every human vessel, their hulls coated with the same stealth materials that kept the main fleet invisible. Each pod carried a squad of Marines equipped with technology that would have seemed like magic to the aliens who had first made contact with humanity half a century ago. The Marines didn't take prisoners. They took samples. First wave of intelligence. "Data is coming in," announced the ship's eye. Its voice, artificially calm despite the magnitude of destruction, was coordinating. Hegemony archives contain references to 17 additional species they consider potential allies against humanity. 17. More civilizations that would need to be dealt with. Kate added them to the list she kept locked in her personal files, a catalog of every species in known space that might one day pose a threat to Earth. The list had started with 12 names 5 years ago. It now contained over 300. "Entries, ma'am," one of the communications officers called out. "We're receiving a transmission from the Hegemony flagship. They're requesting terms for surrender." The bridge fell silent. In all their operations across dozens of systems, no enemy force had ever attempted to surrender. They had fought to the death, fled in terror, or simply accepted their fate with alien dignity. But none had ever asked for mercy. Kate felt something twist in her chest, an emotion she had thought she'd successfully suppressed years ago. For just a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to accept their surrender, to spare even this one system, to prove that humanity could still show restraint when faced with defeated enemies. Then she remembered New Geneva. She remembered the children's playground on Haven Colony, now nothing more than radioactive glass. She remembered the transmission logs from Greenfield, where the colonists had begged for help that would never come while alien harvesters systematically dismantled their world. "No response," she said quietly. "Continue with the operation." The communications officer hesitated for just a moment before closing the channel. Kate didn't blame him. She remembered when she would have hesitated too. But hesitation was a luxury that humanity could no longer afford. "Phase 4, she commanded. The final phase was always the most efficient. Antimatter weapons deployed. With surgical precision against every population center, every military installation, every place where life might somehow survive the coming cleansing. The Hegemony fleet, crippled and isolated, could only watch as their worlds died beneath them. Kate forced herself to watch the destruction, to witness every flash of annihilation as it painted the darkness with brief, terrible light. This was her responsibility, her burden, and she would not look away from what she had become. By the time the last world died, the Hegemony fleet had stopped trying to fight back. They simply waited in the darkness, surrounded by the debris of their civilization, for humanity's judgment to reach them. It didn't take long. The aftermath was always the hardest part. Kate stood in the fleet's primary intelligence analysis chamber, surrounded by holographic displays showing everything humanity had learned from the Hegemony archives. Star charts revealed the locations of dozens of previously unknown civilizations. Communication logs showed detailed discussions of humanity's aggressive expansion and plans for a coordinated response. Most damning of all were the biological samples, evidence that the Hegemony had been experimenting with human genetic material, trying to develop targeted biological weapons. They were planning something called Operation Final Harvest, reported Chief Intelligence Officer Dana Wells, her voice carefully professional despite the horror of what she was reading. Complete biological elimination of human settlements across 16 systems, timed to coincide with a coordinated military assault on Earth itself. Kate absorbed this information without visible reaction. It was always the same story: another species, another plan to wipe out humanity, another narrow escape from extinction that most humans would never even know about. The irony was bitter. In trying to prevent their own genocide, humanity had become experts at committing it. How long before they would have been ready? She asked. Intelligence estimates suggest 18 months. They were waiting for 2 more species to join their alliance, the Zentari Collective, in something called the Unity of Minds. 2 more names for Kate's list: 2 more civilizations that would need to be dealt with before they could threaten Earth. The cycle continued, each victory revealing new enemies, each cleansed system opening pathways to threats they hadn't even known existed. Commander Gray approached her station, carrying a data pad with the efficiency reports from the Meridian operation. "Final casualty estimates are coming in," he said quietly. "Hegemony losses are total complete extinction across 17 worlds. Estimated population eliminated, 47 billion souls." 47 billion. Kate had long since stopped trying to calculate the total number of deaths she had ordered. The numbers were too large, too abstract to hold any real meaning. Instead, she focused on the one number that mattered: 0. 0 human casualties in the operation. 0 human. Worlds threatened by the hegemony. 0 chance that any hegemony survivor would ever again plot humanity's destruction. "Excellent work," she replied, signing off on the report. "What's our status for the next operation?" Paul consulted his data pad. "The Zentari Collective has 9 inhabited systems in the Outer Rim. Long-range reconnaissance suggests they're primarily a trading confederation, but intelligence indicates they've been purchasing military hardware from questionable sources." Kate nodded. In her experience, there were no innocent trading confederations. Every species that had achieved spaceflight was a potential threat to humanity, whether they knew it or not. The gentle Altarians had seemed innocent too, right up until they revealed their true intentions. "Prep the fleet for jump. I want full intelligence packages on all Zentari worlds within 72 hours. "Ma'am," Dana interrupted, looking uncomfortable. "There's something else in the hegemony archives. Communications with Earth Command, dating back 6 months. Kate felt a chill run down her spine. Communications with Earth that she hadn't been informed about were always dangerous. "Show me." The holographic display shifted to show a series of encrypted messages between the hegemony leadership and someone identified only as Administrator Jin. Kate read through the messages with growing unease, her expression darkening with each line. The messages revealed a secret negotiation, the hegemony offering to share advanced medical technology with Earth in exchange for a ceasefire. They had been willing to provide cures for cancer, treatments for genetic disorders, even life extension therapies that could add centuries to human lifespans. All they wanted in return was for humanity to stop expanding into their territory. "When were these sent?" Kate asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "The most recent communication is dated 4 days ago," Dana replied. "The hegemony was still attempting to negotiate even after we entered their system." Kate stared at the messages, feeling something cold and hard settle in her chest. Earth Command had been conducting secret negotiations with the enemy while she was preparing to exterminate them. They had been offered medical miracles that could save millions of human lives, and they had chosen war instead. No, they had chosen to let her choose war for them. "Commander Gray," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her mind, "send a priority message to Fleet Command. Tell them the Meridian operation was a complete success. All hegemony assets eliminated, no survivors." Paul looked confused. "Ma'am, shouldn't we mention the negotiations? The medical technology?" Kate looked at him with eyes that had seen too much, done too much, sacrificed too much to ever turn back now. "What negotiations, Commander?" "Our intelligence sweep found no evidence of any desire for peaceful resolution. The hegemony was planning to attack Earth within 18 months. We eliminated the threat." She watched understanding dawn in Paul's eyes. He had been with her long enough to know what her silence meant. The negotiations had never happened. The medical technology had never been offered. The 47 billion dead had never been anything but enemies of humanity. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "No negotiations found." Kate turned back to the star charts, already planning their approach to Zentari space. Behind her, She could hear the quiet bustle of her crew preparing for the next cleansing, the next necessary extinction, the next step in humanity's journey. Toward absolute security, Dachi had become something monstrous in service to her species. But monsters, she had learned, were sometimes exactly what humanity needed to survive. The end came not with fanfare, but with silence. Admiral Kate Rivers stood in the observation deck of the Defiance, now the flagship of humanity's most powerful fleet, watching the last star system in the galaxy burn. Around her, the cosmos had been transformed into something unrecognizable, a vast graveyard where once thriving civilizations had given way to empty space and human colonies. It had taken 37 years since that first betrayal by the Altarians. 37 years of systematic expansion, elimination, and what history would undoubtedly call the greatest act of genocide in galactic history. Every intelligent species they had encountered had been catalogued, studied, and ultimately erased from existence. Kate was 73 years old now, her hair silver white, her face a map of lines earned through decades of impossible decisions. The uniform she wore bore decorations that no human before her had ever earned, medals for services that no one on Earth would ever fully understand. "Final confirmation from all sector commands," reported Captain Lisa Park, who had been promoted to Kate's second-in-command after Paul's death during the Andromeda incident 15 years earlier. "The Unity of Minds Collective has been completely eliminated. All inhabited worlds in the sector show 0 biosignatures." Kate nodded slowly. The Unity of Minds had been the last entry on her lista, species of hive-minded entities who had somehow managed to evade humanity's expansion for over 2 decades. Their elimination marked the completion of what she had privately called the Great Silence. "Status of human colonies?" she asked. "Over 4,000 settled worlds across 17 galaxies," Lisa replied, consulting her datapad. "Population approaching 200 billion. Economic output is up 30% over last year's figures. No external threats detected anywhere. In known space, no external threats." Kate almost smiled at the phrase. Of course there were no external threats. They had systematically eliminated every species capable of posing one. Humanity now existed alone in a universe tailored specifically for their survival and growth. "Admiral," came a voice from behind her. Kate turned to see Commander Robert Kane, the fleet's youngest officer and one of the few people aboard who hadn't lived through the early days of the war. "We're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Prime. The Colonial Council is requesting a full debrief on the completion of what they're calling the final operations." Kate had been expecting this call for months. With no more enemies to fight, no more species to eliminate, her fleet had essentially worked itself out of a job. The Colonial Council would want to know what humanity should do with the most powerful military force in galactic history, now that its primary mission was complete. "Transfer the call to my ready room," she said. "I'll take it privately." Her ready room was a sparse, functional space that reflected the practical nature of her command. No personal decorations, no mementos from the countless worlds she had watched die. Just maps, tactical displays, and a single photograph of Earth taken from orbit, a reminder of what all the death had been meant to protect. The holographic display activated, showing the faces of the 12 counselors who governed humanity's sprawling interstellar empire. At their head sat Chancellor Mike Torres, a man Kate had known since the early days of the war, when he had been nothing more than a junior logistics coordinator. "Admiral Rivers," Torres began, his voice carrying the weight of authority that came with governing 200 billion souls. "Congratulations on the completion of your mission. The Colonial Council wishes to formally recognize your service to humanity with the highest honors our species can bestow." Kate listened to the prepared speech with detached interest. Words like heroic service and sacrifices for the greater good sounded hollow after everything she had done. Heroes didn't commit genocide. Heroes didn't systematically eliminate entire civilizations. Heroes didn't make the kinds of choices that kept them awake at night for decades. "Thank you, Chancellor," she replied when he finished. "What are your orders for the fleet?" Torres exchanged glances with his fellow counselors. "That's what we need to discuss with you, Admiral." With no external threats remaining, the Council has been debating the future role of humanity's military forces. Some believe we should focus on exploration and expansion. Others think we should prioritize internal security. Kate understood the subtext. Without enemies to fight, her fleet represented a potentially dangerous concentration of power. The ships under her command could easily overwhelm any planetary defense system, could dictate terms to the Colonial Council itself if she chose. The question wasn't what to do with the fleet, it was whether they could trust her to give up the power she had accumulated. "I have a recommendation," Kate said quietly. "We're listening." She had been thinking about this moment for years, planning for the day when her work would finally be complete. Decommission the fleet. Scrap the ships, discharge the personnel, destroy the weapons that made the Great Silence possible. Humanity no longer needs the tools of xenocide. The silence that followed her words stretched across the light years between them. Finally, Torres spoke. "Admiral, you're talking about dismantling the most powerful military force in galactic history. What if we encounter new threats? What if some species survived our operations and returns for revenge?" Kate smiled, and for the first time in decades, it was a genuine expression of satisfaction. "Chancellor, we have explored 97% of this galaxy. We have cataloged every star system, every planet, every asteroid that could potentially harbor life. There are no surviving species. There are no hidden civilizations. There are no new threats coming." She gestured to the star chart surrounding her desk. "Humanity is alone, exactly as we intended. We have achieved perfect security through perfect isolation. The question now is whether we want to remain the kind of species that could commit the Great Silence, or whether we want to become something better." The counselors began debating among themselves, their voices mixing together in a cacophony of political calculations and strategic considerations. Kate muted the audio and turned to look out her window at the empty space where the unity of minds had once thrived. She had spent 37 years becoming humanity's monster, and now her work was complete. Every species that could threaten Earth was gone. Every civilization that might one day develop the technology to challenge humanity had been eliminated in its infancy. The universe belonged to human beings alone. Whether that was a victory or a tragedy, Kate supposed, would be for history to decide. When she unmuted the channel, Torres was looking directly at her. "The Council has voted, Admiral. We accept your recommendation. Begin immediate decommissioning of all military assets not required for internal security. You'll receive formal orders within the hour." Kate nodded. "Understood, Chancellor. It's been an honor serving humanity." After the transmission ended, she remained alone in her ready room for a long time, surrounded by the maps of dead civilizations and the silence of empty space. Outside her window, human colony ships were already beginning their journey to the Unity worlds, carrying settlers who would build new homes on the graves of the species that had once lived there. "Earth doesn't conquer for glory," she thought to herself, remembering the words that had guided her through decades of impossible choices. "We conquer so they never return." Mission accomplished.